Good evening, everyone. I'm David McLaughlin, Provost of New York University, and I'm pleased to be with you here tonight, as is my co-host, Professor Jess Ben-Abib, who is the Interim Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. We welcome you to the Jacob J. Javits Visiting Professor Lecture, an event that is co-hosted by New York University and the Jacob K. Javits Foundation. Our lecture tonight will be presented by Pete Hamill, who is a distinguished writer-in-residence at NYU's Arthur Carter Institute of Journalism. We have tonight a diverse audience which reflects Pete's distinguished career and the timely subject of his lecture tonight. Our audience includes members of our NYU community, faculty, staff, alumni, and students from a number of our schools, as well as members of the local and international community of journalists and other visitors to NYU. Among our extended faculty, I am pleased to welcome the journalist Fukiko Aoki, who accompanies her husband, Pete Hamill. Please join me, too, in greeting the trustees and leadership of the Jacob K. Javits Foundation, Mr. Jeffrey Keel and Ms. Patricia Perlman, and in his absence, the Honorable William Vanden Heuvel. Finally, I ask you to welcome Mrs. Marion B. Javits, whose generosity has made possible the Jacob K. Javits Visiting Professorship at NYU. Mrs. Javits is accompanied by her daughter, Carla Javits. Carla continues the family legacy of public service, presently as president of the Roberts Enterprise Development Fund, a San Francisco-based venture philanthropy organization. Marion Javits is president and chief executive officer of the Jacob K. Javits Foundation. She is the widow of the four-term U.S. Republican senator from New York, the late Jacob K. Javits. From 1946 till 1954, Jacob Javits represented the New York 21st Congressional District, including Manhattan's Upper West Side, in the U.S. House of Representatives. In 1954, he ran against the Democratic candidate Franklin Roosevelt Jr. and was elected New York State Attorney General. In 1956, he defeated the Democratic candidate Mayor Robert F. Wagner Jr. and was elected to the United States Senate. He served 4 terms in the Senate until 1980. While in the Senate, he introduced legislation that became the War Powers Act of 1973. He was a strong advocate of ERISA, the Employment, Retirement, and Income Security Act, and a supporter of the National Endowments for the Arts and Humanities. Senator Javits was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1983. He died on March 7, 1986. Marion Javits, in her own right, is a distinguished arts consultant and patron of music and the arts. She has served on several state and national boards dealing with the arts and the humanities, women's issues, and the mentally handicapped. Tonight, we honor Mrs. Marion Javits and the memory of her late husband, Senator Jacob K. Javits. It is the mission of the Jacob K. Javits Foundation to encourage excellence in public service and to support the next generation of students and scholars in this pursuit. This was a goal of the senator during his lifetime and a commitment that Mrs. Marion Javits has nurtured as head of the Javits Foundation. The Jacob K. Javits Visiting Professorship at NYU was established to honor the memory of the late senator, who was an alumnus of the NYU Law School, and to perpetuate the values and intellectual integrity for which he stood. The professorship is awarded to a distinguished individual, an academic, lawyer, policymaker, journalist, historian, philosopher, or former elected official, whose work focuses on the issues close to the senator's issues and interests. These areas include health, civil rights, labor, foreign policy, the rights of the handicapped individuals, education, and fairness in employment and economic security for working Americans. The professorship at NYU was inaugurated in 2008. Previous incumbents of this professorship are Howard Gardner, the Hobbs Professor of Cognition and Education at Harvard University's Graduate School of Education, and David Oshinsky, the Blanton Professor of History at the University of Texas. David is with us here tonight. In a few moments, Professor Joe Lee will introduce Pete Hamill. Professor Lee is the Glucksman Chair of Irish Studies and NYU Professor of History and Irish Studies. He is also director of the Glucksman Ireland House, a center for Irish American oral history. Joe Lee came to NYU in 2002 from University College Cork, where he chaired the history department and was Dean of Arts and Vice President. He was educated at University College Dublin, the Institute for European History in Mainz, Germany, and Peterhouse, Cambridge. Professor Lee has been active in the public forum, serving as an elected independent member of the Irish Senate and the British-Irish Parliamentary Committee from 1993 until 97. His current research focuses on the 19th century Irish nationalist Michael Davitt, nationalism, and the Irish and Irish-American history in transnational context. Amongst his publications, he is co-editor of Making the Irish American, the history and heritage of the Irish in the United States. Please welcome Professor Lee, who will introduce our speaker tonight. Joe.
Thank you very much indeed, David, for that very generous introduction. I have to say this isn't by any means the first time I've had the pleasure and the privilege of introducing Pete, because as a member of our advisory board in Glucksman Ireland House, he has given us generously the benefit of many readings from his prolific pen. So we've heard him several times, and I've had the pleasure of introducing him. I still find it incongruous, I have to say, despite that I should be here as somebody who came very late in life to New York and indeed to America, that I should be introducing one of the best known and best loved of all New Yorkers to a New York audience. You know, there's a distinct incongruity in that, but there's also a great pleasure and a great privilege in it. And it's hard to know where to begin with Pete. He is what we would call in Irish, in the Irish language, far ilgenehoch, a myriad-minded man. So one could speak for hours on Pete. And except that I've been told I'm not to, I would. But I'll be very brief, and I'll concentrate simply on a dimension of the topic he's going to talk about this evening, which is immigration, as I understand, or immigration in American life. And it brings back to me, in a sense, strange sentiments. It's the first time I went back to Ireland after a semester here 8 years ago. I'm going back for Christmas. And I was walking along the street in Cork, where we've lived for 30 years, and I knew every stone on that street. And I still felt a stranger. I said, there's something very odd about this place. And I asked myself what was it, and then it dawned on me. I was seeing only one colour, and I was hearing only one language as I walked along. And that is the antithesis of this city. It's the antithesis of Greenwich Village. It's the antithesis of the ideal that many of us outside America, and I hope many inside America, have of the United States itself. And I began to ponder, at that time, the place of immigration in American experience in general. And it's immigration, it's we can say a nation of immigrants. It's a hackneyed phrase, but it's an absolutely true phrase, and it gets to the essence of American identity, it seems to me. Because one can see in lots of other countries there are democracies elsewhere. America is the great arsenal of democracy, yes, but there are democracies elsewhere, and there are immigrant countries elsewhere. But there's no country on earth that combines all these things together, or that has such a diversity of immigrant peoples and such a range of experience of immigration over a couple of centuries. That has been central to the growth of American power, of course, because as of roughly 1800, the then United States believe it or not, had a smaller population than the then Ireland. And that puts in some sort of comparative context the two trajectories, rather divergent ones, since then. And it's the growth of that population, the range of issues that it raised, the range of challenges it posed to a very vibrant society. And of course, the vibrancy of that society itself partly came from the variety of people coming. That, to me, remains one of the wonders of the modern world. And in Pete, we have, to my way of thinking, one of the great celebrants of diversity, one of the great celebrants of variety in American life. He has written in a whole raft of books. I forget the number, Pete, but it's an extraordinary number of books. And it's not so much the number, it's simply the incisiveness of the insights into so many aspects of American life that really strikes one. Because I don't think Pete can write an unoriginal sentence. Whatever he's writing, whether he calls it journalism, whether he calls it novels, whether he calls it memoir, I don't think you call it history, Pete, but a lot of it is actually history. Even if you wouldn't accept that. He has some most eloquent commentary on why facts aren't enough. And I think in his heart of hearts he thinks that historians really collect facts, and that's that. And it requires a higher imagination to turn them into a deeper understanding of the human condition, which it does, by the way. But some historians have that too, mind you. So it's wonderful for me to be able to introduce Pete in that respect. I would say he's not simply, or not only, I shouldn't say simply, not only the celebrant of diversity and of variety, he's also the celebrant of, in a way, I would say, renewal in American life. Now, and that's why I think we can look forward this afternoon, particularly to the way he will approach this issue, because of course there are big challenges about immigration at this particular moment. There are challenges about immigration, there are challenges to the American way of life in many ways. And I'm intrigued as to how he's going to actually approach that. So listen, without holding you any further, and asking you to greet Pete for the whole diversity that he brings to the way he looks at things. And remembering one more thing about him, because I can never think of Pete when I'm reading him. And I would commend to you in particular, by the way, and this isn't a book that's often mentioned, Pete, when I see the lists of what you've written. There's a book called, is it Piecework? Published in 1996, where, by the way, on the blurb, he's described as a veteran reporter. So I don't know what it leaves you now if you're a veteran reporter in 1996. But it's a wonderful, the introduction is stunning. It's stunning in terms of, in a sense, he's talking to himself. And he's talking, first of all, about the joys of writing. And we're in an institution which celebrates writing. That's what the university is partly about, writing and the importance of writing. And there are some of the most eloquent passages of, I would say, self-exploration that one will find anywhere about the importance of writing in one's life. But that's there. He's talking about the past, he's talking about immigrants, about new immigrants, about the revival of New York in the 1990s, partly through the new immigrants. Pete is, did I say I was going to finish a minute ago? Never mind, I better finish quickly. Pete, I don't know how quite to put this. I think, Pete, you're sentimental about the past, but you're not nostalgic about it. And in this sense, that of course you celebrated, there's a wonderful leading review in the Sunday New York Times book section on Hank Aaron earlier this year. A fabulous piece of writing, an absolute gem of writing. And it is full of sentiment. And there is an element of nostalgia. But he also embraces, and I would say exultingly embraces, change. Because change is the law of life. And so you can wax eloquent about the past, and very eloquent. You can retrieve it, you can recover it, you can burnish it. But it is the base. It's the base for moving on. And I know nobody who can actually extol the joys, the virtues, the challenges, the achievements of the past, who can wax over New York. And if you doubt that, read the opening of the one where your mother brings you to downtown, to Brooklyn Bridge. It's a most wonderful evocation of the idea of New York as a city. But then it moves on. And so that's, I think, what I hope we will hear this evening, where you take the past, Pete, and you tell us where we're going now. Thank you very much indeed. Pete?
Thank you very much, Joe. I actually think that nostalgia is important, but sentimentality is not. You know, that nostalgia is about for things that have existed. Penn Station, the Brooklyn Dodgers, etc., in New York past. Sentimentality is a lie told about the past, in which people feel, I want to be like the people in Norman Rockwell paintings or something, and they were not accurate to start with. Beautifully done, but so it's a good subject for a course, Joe. It's an honor to be here, and I thank you all for coming out on a night of amazingly brutal weather out there. And again, I'd like to offer a special thanks to Marion Javits for making the night possible, and for, of course, the Marion B. and Jacob J. Javits Foundation, who have done so many good things, including getting you all out of the cold tonight. The subject, as Joe said, is immigration, specifically the immigration mess. And more than that, the legal, political, and moral mess involving undocumented immigrants in the United States, or if you prefer, illegal immigration. By most estimates, there are slightly less, just under 10 million such human beings within the borders of this country, down from a peak of about 12.5 in 2007. According to the highly respected Pew Research Center, about 56% are from Mexico, another 22% from other Spanish-speaking countries, 13% from Asia, 6% from Europe and Canada, which would include, Joe, the new arrivals from the wreckage of the Celtic Tiger in Ireland, I'm sure. One-way tickets from 3% from Africa and the rest of the world. All those numbers, I am sure, are estimates, that there is no exactitude when you're trying to figure out the number of illegal or undocumented people in the country. The reasons are obvious. What we do know is that every one of these human beings lives in the shadows of this country, fearful of the midnight knock on the door, fearful of the moment when the Iceman cometh. But before going into details, before discussing solutions, I must admit to an absolute lack of objectivity about the subject. The reasons are personal. First, like so many here tonight, I'm a child of immigrants, as was Jack Javits himself. My parents came separately from Northern Ireland in the 1920s, Catholics in a place of Protestant bigotry and certainty. They met here in New York, married in one of the worst years of the Great Depression, and lived here until their deaths in their 80s. They came, as did so many others from distant places, millions of them, to be free. Free to choose their own political leaders. Free of the institutionalized bigotry that closed so many doors. Free to work without regard to religion or who the hell you came, what school did you come from and why don't you go back to it? Above all, they came with hopes that their own children would never have to live in a place where the deck was stacked against them from birth. I was the first of their 7 American children, and from birth, I was a citizen of the Democratic Republic of Brooklyn, and of course, the United States of America. Brooklyn is the second reason for my passion about tonight's subject. We grew up in a working-class neighborhood made up of Irish, Italians, and Jews. The great migration of African Americans from the American South had not quite begun. the migration from Puerto Rico was still a trickle. It came basically to Brooklyn, though, through the Bull Line, which docked down on the Brooklyn waterfront. But among my friends, almost all were immigrants or their children. People named Ventriglio, Pinto, and Caputo, McAlevey, Doherty, and Collins, Greenberg, Barron, and Metcalf. During the longest summer days in human history, we played stickball together in the streets. Our parents shopped in the same stores and talked and laughed from folding chairs under the fire escapes on sweltering August evenings. No air conditioning in that neighborhood. No television yet. Almost no telephones. Just life. Rich, human, teeming life. The candy stores carried 8 daily newspapers, along with the Daily Forward, a Polish paper called Nowy Świat, Il Progresso in Italian, and the weekly Irish Echo. We never heard words like diversity or multiculturalism. We lived them. That doesn't mean that we grew up among saints or angels. There were bad guys there, and violent drunks, and apprentice mobsters. After the war, street gangs emerged, the Tigers and the South Brooklyn Boys among the better known. If you were looking for trouble, you could usually find it. But a great surge of optimistic change was also in the air at the end of the war. Because in 1945, 15 years of depression and war were over. 15 years of austerity, of self-denial, or in Lorraine Hansberry's phrase, dreams deferred. But the end of the war also brought us one of those big government programs that so rile a small part of the American nation, the GI Bill of Rights. It would change many, many lives. For almost the first time, the sons of pushcart vendors and laborers, taxi drivers and factory workers could go to the university. Many were the first people in the long histories of their families, going all the way back to what each called the old country, to graduate from universities. Here at NYU, about 40,000 GIs, graduates of World War II and survivors of those battles, came to Washington Square. Here, they would justify all the sacrifices made by their parents. They would justify all they had gone through at the war. They would change New York forever. And with millions of counterparts around the nation, they would change the United States of America. To be sure, in my neighborhood, most of the soldiers, sailors, and Marines who made it home alive did not choose the educational benefits of the GI Bill. They married the girls they left behind and then chose the housing benefits. If you had been in the Hurtgen forest or survived the bulge, if you had come ashore in Gela in Sicily or at Anzio or Normandy, if you had been at Guadalcanal or Tarawa or Iwo Jima, you were unlikely to want to live in a cold water flat. Levittown must have seemed like paradise. But by the time of the Korean War, something had changed profoundly. In my house, too. I went into the Navy, earned the GI Bill, and in late August of 1956, took the step that gave me the rest of my life. With my friend from Brooklyn, Tim Lee, who is here tonight, I boarded a bus on 34th Street in Manhattan, and we took it all the way to Mexico City. We were going to a marvelous school called Mexico City College. Later, I learned that both William Burroughs, the author of Naked Lunch, and Jack Kerouac had done some time, probably very badly, at Mexico City College. I think it's where Burroughs shot his wife in the head, aiming for an apple, while the William Tell Overture played on a phonograph. They got him out of town very fast. There were many veterans at the school, and once a month we formed a long line to pick up our checks from the Veterans Administration. The professors were almost all very good, but we were learning lessons beyond the classrooms. Above all, as my primitive Spanish got marginally better, I learned about Mexicans, one at a time. Their good manners, their patience with young gringos who knew very little Spanish, their stoicism, their gifts for laughter and song, their absolute allegiance to family. For the first time, I understood how difficult it must have been for the Italians and Jews, Greeks and Poles and Germans when they arrived in New York through Ellis Island. Without English, they couldn't be polite, couldn't make jokes with the people who were there before them, couldn't express irony or subtlety or friendship. I was the same in Mexico. It was a lesson I've never forgotten. In the more than 50 years that have followed that first time in Mexico, I've returned again and again, living for long stretches among Mexicans, cherishing my friendships with Mexicans from all classes. I've seen changes, seen the amazing human drama of the 1985 earthquake, when thousands died, and many thousands of ordinary citizens rose to the challenge of managing the disaster. I saw true democracy take hold in the two most recent elections, saw the rise of a vibrant, free press, and witnessed the heartbreak and injustice that can send good people into exile. In the past 15 years, more and more Mexican families were split. I met those who stayed home. I met those who eventually made the long, dangerous journey to El Norte. On many nights in Mexico City, I saw the long lines forming outside the American Embassy on Paseo de la Reforma. People, most of them young, who wanted to make the journey legally. They had documents, or thought they did. They had clean police records, if those mattered. They had contacts in the United States or a job offer. Many had traveled long distances from small Mexican towns without U.S. consulates. Many had gone only to the end of primary school, usually the 5th grade. On the line, they often had to pay someone to hold their place while they used a portable San John. Many shivered on cold nights, not dressed for Mexico City, which is 7,000 feet above sea level. And when I talked to them, they were often shy, often reticent. And many said they wanted to work in Los Estados Unidos because they had just been married. They wanted a better life for their children, or they wanted to help the families they would leave behind. Mothers, fathers, young siblings, grandparents. That is, they said the same thing that the Irish would have said 100 years ago, or the Italians, or the Eastern European Jews. I have a clear memory of my mother in 1946, a very hard year after the war ended, putting a hard-earned $5 bill into an envelope and mailing it to her brother Maurice on Mount Pottinger Road in Belfast. He and his 2 daughters were suffering. She did what so many other immigrants did. In her small way, she helped. So the current mess is, for me, not a case of colliding abstractions. It involves people I see, we see, every day in New York City. The many thousands who started arriving more than 20 years ago, mainly from the state of Puebla. The increasing numbers now from Oaxaca, deep in the south of the Mexican Republic. You see them on the subways early in the morning, late at night, coming from El Barrio in East Harlem or from Sunset Park in Brooklyn. Workers in restaurants, women who clean office buildings at night, nannies, people who did not come here to sit on stoops, people who helped put social cement back into New York when the crack wars began to end because they carried the work ethic in their backpacks and still do. You see them in every one of our major cities and also in most states of this union. They work in processing plants. They pull food from the earth. They mow lawns using their skills at plumbing and carpentry. Very few speak about pursuing glamorous careers. That will be for their children, as it was for our parents. Now, here, in this time of their lives, they must work. They must pay rent. They must put food on the table for the children. And for me, the heart of the matter is, in this debate, is the existence of those children. 3 million of them are Americans. That is, born in these United States. As good as every other American, as good as every member of the United States Congress, and every member of what I call the League of Frightened White Guys, who would like to deport every single one of the parents of those children, or change the Constitution to prevent citizenship for the children of the undocumented. If the deportationistas have their way and manage to round up the 10 million, where would those American children go? To the tender mercies of foster care? To forced deportation into countries they have never seen and where they might not even know the language? Or would they save them for a place like Guantanamo, once and if it is ever emptied? If you designed a master plan to create a new criminal class, that would be the way to do it. We should always remember that this was done before. In 1931, when Herbert Hoover was president in the early months of the Depression, thousands of Mexicans were rounded up in the border states, the former territory of Mexico, as we all know, along with their American children, placed in railroad cars and sent away to the south over the border. Some had lived in the United States since before the Mexican Revolution of 1910, 1920. Ni modo, they were sent away. The American children were not easily accepted in Mexico. And when Pearl Harbor was bombed, all those years ago on this very date, and the war began, and many young Americans were drafted for the coming struggle, what happened? The story has been told by writers as diverse as Carrie McWilliams and Octavio Paz. Contractors headed back into Mexico, located many of those who had been deported, and asked them to come back. They came with their children. Those young Mexican Americans had been marginalized, neither Mexican nor American, and in Boyle Heights and Chavez Ravine and most of East LA, they created a culture of the margin. The zoot suit was soon on the street. The Pachuco was born. In 1943, there were zoot suit riots in Los Angeles with sailors defending American ideals by stripping Pachucos of their drapes and cutting off their long hair. Later that same year, riots broke out in Detroit and right here in Harlem. People died. Much of the problem in that time, when the American armed forces remained segregated, was rooted in a prevailing hypocrisy. The difference between what America said it was and what it actually was. The current debate, in my eyes at least, is also suffused with an old American virus, the virus of nativism. The 19th century was full of examples of nativist violence against immigrants, including some not far from this hall, Astor Place, for example. But in the 20th century, nativism combined with populism and the revival of the Ku Klux Klan was soon underway. The modern Klan, inspired by D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, had chapters north and south and would prove to be the most enduring terrorist organization in American history. They hated all immigrants, those Irish and Italian Catholics, those goddamn Jews. They hated all African Americans, of course, those millions of former slaves and their children, descendants of the only immigrants who had come to America in chains and manacles. But the Klan insisted that there was only one way to be a true American, to be white and Christian. Many embraced a fiction disguised as science called eugenics to prove the case for white superiority. They enforced it with the lynch mob's rope, the torch, the gun. I mention all of this because the virus has emerged again, by which I don't mean that those who want to get rid of all illegals are the equivalent of Klansmen. But I raise the subject because the hypocrisy is so obvious. Christian Minutemen sit on the border prepared to shoot men named Jesus. Many of those who have championed family values for the past 25 years are prepared to break up immigrant families. On talk radio, the internet, and other venues, there is a mean-spirited tone, a self-righteous belief that they are the only Americans to much of the discussion, along with a good dose of paranoia. Above all, there is now a growing tendency to equate the soldiers of the drug war along the Mexican side of our border with the lives, hopes, and ambitions of immigrants. The drug war with its savagery, hundreds of decapitations by now, is a horror to all of us who love Mexico and Mexicans. But every intelligent observer knows what is driving it. The enormous appetite of so many Americans to spend all or part of each day in a state of unearned rush or stupor. The people that buy drugs are killing people in Mexico. Supply is driving demand. The market includes the tools of violence. Thousands of weapons have been confiscated by the Mexican armed forces. Almost all of them originated in the 6,200 gun shops along the American side of the border. Nobody is happier with the agenda of the National Rifle Association than the Bloods, the Crips, and the Mexican drug lords. The immigrants are not the drug lords. They come here to work, and we need them. Because the old system worked, and the children and grandchildren of the European immigrants have moved beyond honorable manual labor, farm work, and jobs in the service industries. We need these people, not just Mexicans, but all of those who want to begin a new life here. They need us, but we need them too. And so the eternal question, what is to be done? Obviously, there can be no waving of a magic wand when dealing with so many human beings, particularly in a country afflicted with hard times as we are. But clearly, there are changes that can be made now if politicians in both major parties can find the courage to act with clarity, compassion, and intelligence. To begin, there must be some form of amnesty. Amnesty has been turned into a dirty word, a word so ugly coming off the tongues of some people that I had to look it up in the Webster's New Collegiate Dictionary, which defines it as, quote, the act of an authority as a government by which pardon is granted to a large group of individuals. That's all it says. Such a pardon, if it happens, and it's going to be necessary, because no country has ever been able to round up 10 million people and claim to be just when they were done. The crime of crossing a border is not a felony without papers. It's not a felony. It's the equivalent of a misdemeanor. So there are people trying to change the law to make it a felony to cross the border. But many voices have been raised to make it seem as if this is some kind of enormous swindle that people are going to pull by offering amnesty or pardon or forgiveness to the 10 million who are already on this side of the border. Some of them crossed the border on their own. Some of them overstayed legal visas. Some of them came as students and stayed on. But amnesty could be granted before a specific date and would require the pardoned to come forth and identify themselves. That is, to register. Obviously, those who've been convicted of felonies, either in the US or back in the old country, would be subjected to much closer scrutiny. People who served time for political crimes in non-democratic countries would not be scrutinized in the same way that a man or woman who killed someone would be. The crucial factor would be the telling of truth with information that can be checked and verified some way or another. One condition for pardon would be production of tax records, including payments in this country. If employers had deducted money from paychecks as taxes or Social Security, etc., that should be enough for the immigrant to establish a work record. The feds could then check to be sure that the employers didn't pocket the deductions for themselves, which I keep hearing reports about from around the country. Freelancers, the guy who joins other craftsmen on street corners to be picked up by somebody who needs a sink fixed and so on, not a regular employee, would have a harder time because a lot of people don't keep very good records. But I think there's a way, there has to be a way to make it clear that those are people working and adding to what goes on in the great cities of the United States. There could be a fine, too, deducted every week from a paycheck. Earlier suggestions that a fine should be as much as $10,000 are obviously absurd. I've never heard of any honest, hard-working immigrant who ever had $10,000 at one time, or even access to such a sum. Maybe Mort Zuckerman when he came from Canada, or Rupert Murdoch, but none of the other immigrants had that kind of dough. But maybe $10 a week for a year would be enough to cover the paperwork. Obviously, too, the embassies and consulates of foreign countries, of non-American countries, would have to agree to do background checks for those without basic documents. We can't go poking around in the records of another country. We could tell that from WikiLeaks in the last week. Once they've registered, the path to citizenship would be open. Perhaps a 5-year waiting period would provide them time to learn more or better English, probably from their children, to learn more about the Constitution and the rights and aspirations of this country, and other aspects of national and local laws. But a registered alien would have a right to a driver's license, the right to join a union, the right to return to the old country to visit family members and return without the services of a coyote. I know people in Mexico who were unable to visit their mothers when they were dying because they weren't sure they could get back across the border a second time, and weren't there in a crucial moment in the history of the family. Younger immigrants who join the American Armed Forces could become citizens when they finish basic training, because after the end of basic training, it's always a lottery about where you go. Some people go to Florida, and some people go to Baghdad. So why wait until the guy is in the grave somewhere? Make him an American the day he graduates from boot camp or basic training. At the same time, the future supply side of workers in seasonal occupations could be processed through storefront mini-American consulates in small towns. There's no need to have a gigantic embassy in a small town, not in the age of the computer. Checking documents for people who do want to legally come to the United States could be a lot easier, a lot simpler, a lot less subjective, less in the hands of people on a staff who might be bored or exhausted by the whole process. One other possibility, and it's been tried in different ways with the Irish over the years, American officials could ask potential seasonal immigrants for a binder, say $500, which is a lot less than they would have to pay a coyote to cross the border. When they return, after 4 or 5 months, the harvest is in, the food is on the plates of Beverly Hills and the West Side. They could get their money back, maybe with interest, and go back to their families in Mexico, if that's the country we're talking about. Certainly the binder idea would be cheaper than anything any coyote is going to come up with, where the going rate now is between $2,000 and $3,000 across the border, with no guarantee that you will end up alive on the other side of it. Variations of these suggestions have been made before. The time to make them real, in my opinion, is now. Congress could start with passage of the DREAM Act to allow young people who were brought here while very young to attend state-supported colleges. But the larger problem must be fixed. We can't have 10,000 people living in the shadows in this country. We have to add them to us, not keep them at a distance. All of us must start, it seems to me, with a recognition that these are people who have already made this a better country. They have done so by example, not by making speeches. They have come here and worked and worked and worked and worked. All of us who came from that very American tradition must be willing to recognize that huge fact. They are us, and we should offer them a hand of welcome, because they are adding to this country more than they are subtracting. I don't like the phrase, the American dream. I think it's such a vague, talk about sentimentality, Joe. Dreams are not willed. None of us can lie down tonight and wish that Michael Jordan would come back as a Knick. We can't imagine, we can't will a dream. We can have a vision of what we can be. And the vision I have always preferred about New York and other parts of the United States, but above all in this astonishing city, is the sense of the American alloy, in which different kinds of metals are joined, and through the forcing of heat, through the collisions of each other with each other, are made into something infinitely stronger than the individual metals alone. I like the idea that these immigrants are adding to the alloy, that we have more languages being spoken here than at any time in our history, that we have, for the first time in history, good Mexican restaurants. When I was a kid, there was a place on 47th Street called Xochitl. No, it was called the Alamo. And if Santa Anna had only fed this food to all the guys in the Alamo, he could have taken them all without firing a shot. It was Tex-Mex gruel that was beyond comprehension. I don't know what they decided to do with the Alamo. There was a good restaurant up there at that time called the Xochitl, the Flower. And we now have good, even better Mexican restaurants because we have Mexicans at last who know what it's supposed to taste like. Before, it was like having Italian restaurants run by the Irish. Which would have baffled everybody. Although, Joe, there was a pizzeria and a pizza counter at a place called Oceantide in Coney Island, where the pizza chef, do you remember the guy, Tim, was Irish, and the food tasted like that, you know. But that sense of the alloy, that sense that we can make something stronger and more enduring and more just, that we can stop the outlawing of other human beings and blaming them for things that we shouldn't blame them for, to be able to take care of those kids who are now 5 and 6 and 10 and make sure they're going to have lives as good as the ones we had. Somebody asked me when Ted Kennedy died, will there ever be another family like the Kennedys, a political family? And I said, yeah, except their names will be Hernandez or Rodriguez or Torres. Somebody working in a field in the Salinas Valley in California is going to have kids who are going to get to the university and make a different country long, maybe not that long in the future, but eventually. And we should be cheering that because it's what is the best of us, what gave us the things that made life really rich in the best possible sense, to be able to know people who were not like you and laugh together. So thank you all for coming. And any questions, fire away. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hello. Are you taking questions now?
Yeah.
My name is Lois Lee. I'm one of the directors of the Chinese American Planning Council. And we serve with the largest social service agency for Asian Americans in the whole United States.
Great.
And we've existed since 1965, civil rights. So we really appreciate American history. And I was born in the United States. And I grew up in Flushing. And there's a lot of racial tension in Flushing right now. Now. And in my school where I teach in, we have 1,500 students and 65 different languages and dialects. So it's really diverse. But it bothers me, the tone of the rhetoric going around nowadays. When I listen to Jon Stewart when he did his march, and it's the tone down, because you're in media, and I just feel that they just give too much emphasis on the wrong things rather than the right things. Now, when we did, the census came out, right? So we wanted to encourage all of our immigrant families to enroll in the census, and they were very afraid. And we encouraged, especially if, we didn't ask for a status if you're legal or illegal, but we said 10 years down the road, if we ever have immigration reform, you can turn back to your census form, and it said, I registered in the census. I was here legally or illegally, but you were here in the country. And so we had 100% of our students and their families, because we educated them to complete the census forms. And plus, they got an ice cream party if they did it. And so, but how can media tone down this rhetoric? I really think you're giving more exposure to the false ideas.
I don't think there's the media, all the media, I don't think the different editors get together at 9 o'clock in the morning at a delicatessen and decide what the line is. There's a divergence in voices. You can see it just in the Times. There are several different people speaking about this issue from different points of view. I want to live in a country which has a conservative voice, you know, where there's a conservative voice active to challenge or test a liberal or progressive voices. I don't want to live in a country where the right wing takes over. Right-wingers are not conservatives. Right-wingers are so full of certainty and the instinct to physical force that they're dangerous. True conservatives are necessary, so scrutinize some of the ideas that come from the more progressive side of the political thing. I think what's happened on television, where a lot of the news is really commentary disguised as news and delivered in many ways in italics, you know, and you want to say, calm down. It's not that important. If you say another word like that, I'm switching to Turner Classic Movies and watching a Natalie Wood movie or something. I think this might be a stage that we're going through with the media, and it'll exhaust itself. More people I know are not watching even shows that they watched last year because it's exhausting. The continuing challenge and sneering at people, and I don't think we have to live like that.
Well, my second point is because our school is actually featured in the Wall Street Journal. We in Flushing had a lot of racial tension because of the lack of English signs in the ethnic stores. So our students actually recreated hundreds of signs, and we translated all the signs into English for the ethnic stores.
What was the best sign?
So, actually, it was funny. Okay, so we're translating. Okay, you know, you're all going to appreciate this. I have to take a little bit of a time. When you go to an ethnic store, and you're going to see all these fruits and vegetables, so you see this prickly vegetable, fruit, and then you're looking at it and you're saying, what is this? Because it has Chinese words, and I was born here, so I couldn't read Chinese, and I felt discriminated against because I couldn't read Chinese. I didn't even know how to eat this fruit. So when we find out there's dragon fruit, and then you go online on the internet, and this is how you cut it, and this is how you cook it. So then I did a workshop for for teachers, 25 Chinese fruits and vegetables and how to use it in the American diet. But the best sign also had to do with a drugstore. It's a pharmacy. And in the window, in Chinese, it said air conditioning, because we did this in the summer. It was a summer service learning program for I have elementary school students, and you're thinking about the children of the future. And so what the sign said in Chinese, adult diapers and I think enriched milk. And so the children are saying, well,
adult diapers, and it's not Miami?
And it was free delivery. So then the students are saying, they're laughing. They thought this was the funniest thing. But then I said, but if you put in English, and I said, my mother died of breast cancer. She needed adult diapers and fortified milk. And if I had known that they had delivered free in Flushing, they could deliver to my mother's house, and she lives in Flushing. But because I couldn't read the Chinese, I didn't know. So we got the senators and the city council people to give the children citations for their wonderful work this summer. But see, Wall Street Journal did pick up on this. So we want to emphasize the positive side. That's it.
Thank you. Any other questions back there?
Hi, my name is Naomi Moland. I'm a doctoral student here. I just have a question about the likelihood of passing immigration reform, or what in the next few years, with the changes in the House and the Senate now, with the changes in administration, possible administration. It just seems like this has been going on for so long. What do you see as the possibility?
Well, yeah, my sense is that it should happen fast to get it over with, but it might not. I think the Democrats and Republicans, neither one of them are lifting the flag and charging the barricade over this issue. They're not doing that. And they're afraid of it. So that, for example, the Republicans should be leading it. Many Latinos in particular are socially conservative. They're good Catholics. They have their ideas about same-sex marriage and all kinds of other stuff. But they'd like to be spokesmen for the people who are in the same neighborhoods but not able to raise a voice anywhere. And they're backing away. The Republicans, of all people, who ought to be leading this and not doing it. But maybe it's certainly not the Republican Party of John Lindsay or Nelson Rockefeller or Jacob Javits or Fiorello LaGuardia or a whole lot of Louis Lefkowitz, a whole lot of other people that were ornaments of our society long ago, from the conservative point of view, not right-wing point of view, but conservative. And there's nobody there at the moment to take up this one social issue and particularly come at it with those 3 million children in mind, American children, and make sure that they're going to live in a better way. The guy that, if I could get a word to Obama or anybody else, the guy who should be in charge of this is Pete Domenici from New Mexico, a Republican. Domenici, when he was a little kid during World War II, he was about 7, the feds came to the house and hauled away his mother, who had come to the United States when she was 2 years old and didn't even know she was illegal, but was illegal. And she was hauled away for a week before she was finally released as not an agent of Mussolini or anything, but somebody from the United States, grown up here. Domenici, I saw an interview he did years ago, never got over that. The sense of his mother being hauled away and thrown in a car and taken away, that's the kind of guy, because he's a Republican, because he's a conservative, who should be leading the fight to say no American kid should ever have to see a parent hauled away because of the way that parent came to the United States. It should never happen. But I haven't heard a word on this issue, even from Pete Domenici, who used to speak out about it every once in a while. It's going to take, I think, the Republicans more than the Democrats. They also have the most at stake. They could lose the Latino vote for another 40 years. Yes, sir.
Amend the Constitution.
Yeah, well, not all the Republicans, but
It's
so that children born
the
here,
right wing has captured the conservative, small c Republican Party of Jacob Javits and Louis Lefkowitz and John Lindsay and Fiorello LaGuardia. There has been a capture of this large party by a minority, and they're very skillful, and they have a few press barons, which you may be familiar with, that have enormous resources to be the blowtorch every day for hatred and for discrimination and for the policies which run counter to the party of Javits. You know,
oh yeah, well, since Lyndon
Rockefeller
Johnson signed the
Republicans were
Civil
chased
Rights
out.
Act.
The Rockefeller Republicans were chased out of the Republican Party. So you have a House that's got many new members that think Ayn Rand is the patron saint of the Republican Party.
It's true. We have a guy named Rand Paul who was I don't know if he was named for her, but at any rate, thank you all. If there's other questions, fire away.
Hi, my name is Kat. I'm a huge fan of your work. I wanted to just say I'm a graduate of NYU, and prior to that, I was actually, I had lived in the United States, not legally, for approximately 23 years. So I wanted to say thank you for mentioning the DREAM Act bill, and I wanted to get your opinion on the fact that right now the DREAM Act bill is trying to be proposed in the House and the Senate as an independent bill separate from immigration reform. And I wanted to know what your thoughts were on that, because there's a lot of controversy in regards to having it separate.
I would prefer comprehensive reform, but lacking that, I think the DREAM Act is a good first step to sort of getting the hatred out of the story and talk about what's in our self-interest. It's in our self-interest to have educated people here. The numbers today in the Times about where we stand educationally around the world, you say, oh my God, what happened to this? Can't they hire a couple of nuns? You know? Plainclothes nuns, by the way. But I think if you could at least get the DREAM Act to start, it establishes the principle that every undocumented person in the country is not a pariah. It's very, very important. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the tendency of the right wing in this country to gravitate toward violence, and I would add demagoguery to that. Given the fact that by the mid part of the century, the white population of this country will cease to be a majority, do you foresee, do you think that violence is unavoidable as that segment of the population feels its mythic way of life more and more threatened?
You know, I hate prophecy. But for the first time in a long, long, long time, I'm worried about where this thing is going. There's too many guns in the country. There's too many guns in this city. Ray Kelly will tell you could cut the crime rate, the murder rate in half if we could stop the guns from coming in from the South. And there's a lot of frightened people for no reason. They go and buy these guns, and the first time they use them is not against an intruder in the second floor window. It's they come home with half a load on, shoot the wife, shoot the 3 kids, then shoot themselves. And the sheriff comes the next day and says, well, they had issues. And I keep thinking, you mean like global warming or something? What issues are they? They use issues in a different way from the way I would, but because every nut can get a gun. You can't even get in the paper for more than 2 days. You get a 15-year-old kid at a high school who holds everybody hostage and shoots himself. And if they get really afraid of the other, as the classic scenario was, they might get desperate again. You know, they might take a not defensive but offensive action, and it could be a disaster. There's certainly millions of guns. Arizona, one of my daughters works there, lives there, and works there for many years. But they're now trying to pass an act that allows everybody in the state to have a sword, to have a samurai sword if he wants it. You know, not just a penknife to pick your nails with, but a samurai sword. Like the guy here who stole the sword from the Masonic temple and went home and killed his mother, you know. And they want to add that to the already unbelievable supply of AK-47s and Kalashnikovs and other machine guns that you can go out and kill rabbits with as good Americans. So I'm very apprehensive about it because there's not going to be enough money in the country. We have a Cold War defense apparatus around the world with bases everywhere, eating the money, while people are on unemployment here. I live down the block from a food stamp place where they go to get cards, and the stream never stops now. Starts at 8 in the morning, and at about 7:30 it starts finally to thin out. The notion that the recession is over seems to be a technical decision and not one that's verified by what you see. So if they're wrong on that, who knows what they're going to be right about later. They could blow this thing. I'm very apprehensive about it. It could be that I'm also old, you know. But I didn't feel great during Vietnam and after Bobby and Martin Luther King were killed and all that. There was a lot of despair at that time too, and then we came out of it. I just hope people come out of this. I mean, one thing that's great is that all those millionaires won't have to throw beer rackets to raise money for the rent. They got the tax break they want. That was there all the time through this collapse. I don't know what the reasoning is behind continuing it, but it's part of the news package every day that makes you yell at the screen. Yes, sir.
Well, thinking more broadly, do you fundamentally then believe in open borders?
With Mexico, I do, yeah. Because we essentially have that with Canada.
Isn't the problem that everyone they want to come here and have to support the younger class?
Why? Suppose they're not bulletproof. Or what are they going? Where are they going to live? They can't afford Brooklyn, you know. I mean, there are essentially open borders in Europe. If you have an EU passport, you can move around. You can basically go different places. I don't think you can have 10 million people living in the shadows. That's not open borders. If they're going to come here, you want them to be able to pay taxes, to join unions, to feel like they're part of it, not just guests. So we'll have to think, all of that has to be thought through. There's some argument for the border, but because of our history with Mexico, the fact that almost all that land was stolen at gunpoint, that the Alamo was the great symbol. It's called a symbol of freedom, but it was the freedom to own other human beings that was at the heart of the matter in Texas, because slavery was forbidden under the Mexican Constitution and the League of Frightened White Guys got to Texas and said, "Oh, we can't do that. We can't pick that cotton. We got to own people and have them do it." That's what led to it. And the Mexican War led to the Civil War, as Lincoln predicted and other good men. So I think because of that history, because I ask myself, as my Mexican friends sometimes do, imagine what the Mexican 20th century would have been like if they had the oil of California, Texas, Oklahoma, etc. Would the United States have been able to afford an automobile-based economy if they had to import all their oil from Mexico? The what-ifs of history, you know, are things we play with all the while. And so I think the Mexican border is a separate thing. This war is a horror that's going on, and I wish we would create some form of political asylum for a lot of those families stuck in Ciudad Juarez getting shot and killed so that Lindsay Lohan can have cocaine. I keep thinking about them too, you know, Lindsay Lohan, Paris Hilton, and what was the other dope that just did it just got wrecked in some hotel here? What the hell's his name? And Charlie Sheen. Imagine if they could be deported and charged as accessories to murder in Mexico and do time in a Mexican prison, because it's their noses that are causing deaths along the Mexican border. And it infuriates me on certain levels. It's a long, other complicated discussion.
Hi, Pete. I'm Tom. And
Hi, Tom.
I want to thank you for what you said tonight. I agree with every word. You know, we grew up in the same neighborhood, except mine was in the Bronx.
I know that feeling.
Of Irish immigrants, one who came to steerage to Canada and so on. But back about 25 years ago, a group of young Irishmen went down to Washington and got the Immigration Reform Act passed.
They certainly did.
A bunch of great young people. But that was possible then. They didn't have one factor that we have today. We have a country that is run by corporations. Ever since the Citizens United Act, or since the United decision was passed by the Supreme Court, the power has been, you know, the politician has the choice between listening to the people or between listening to the corporations who give him the money so he can keep his job. And that's, I think, a factor that was not as strong back then as it is now. So I think we have a parallel problem, a major one that has to be resolved, because if it's in the corporation's interest to have open borders, we'll have open borders.
Yeah.
If it is not, we won't. I think that's the basic factors we take. And somehow we have to find a way to disown this idea that corporations are people and have the same rights as people. They do not. I think our Constitution has been distorted, and we're going to suffer for it. Thank you.
I think it's clear too, Tom, that the influence of lobbyists is so unbelievably powerful. To me, it makes Boss Tweed look like Pericles. You know, the old-fashioned small graft of Tammany Hall in those days at least got some things done. And the unbelievable influence of lobbyists in Washington, which can only be changed by the people benefiting from the lobbyists, getting millions and millions and millions of dollars. that they can spend themselves if they want to. I think that's another part of this fear a lot of us are feeling about where the hell are we going with this country.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, my name is Allison. I'm in the Graduate School of Social Work. And it's been my experience in working with addicts that, Lindsay Lohan, she does not really represent the majority of addicts in this country. Actually, 99.9% of addicts are not the Lindsay Lohans, and a lot of them are the poor. And can you just elaborate on your comments about how, addicts are, in your eyes, killing Mexicans? Because it's my experience that addiction is actually killing addicts, and therefore addiction is killing Mexicans.
Well, the question is, why in this country do so many people want to spend the day stupefied or getting a cheap rush, an unearned rush out of a drug? That's a question we should be asking. Cocaine is not cheap. So I don't think cocaine is the drug of the poor. I think, unfortunately, heroin is the most devastating drug of the poor. And but there are a lot of other people with lots of money who think a line of cocaine is as good as reading a good book. And I don't know what to think about that. I know that when the crack wars were going on here, it was the most dangerous time in New York in my lifetime. The old mob was basically gone, mainly because the young hoodlums were using the drugs they used to peddle. That was one of the problems. But kids were killing each other over the control of a street corner, not a neighborhood. Or when you think that Frank Costello controlled the Democratic and Republican bosses of Manhattan at one time, not so he could sell drugs, but so he could get a friendly judge every once in a while when he thought he needed it for some of his people. That's all changed now. There is some other thing going on. And you can see that when they do make confiscations of drugs, we're talking about tons of cocaine, infinite amounts of meth that are coming north from down there, and fortunes huge enough to justify all the killing that's going on. And it's destroying northern Mexico. It's not destroying democracy. It's not a failed state. It's a state. It's functioning. But the casualties among the poor, little kids that run into a gun battle in a place, in Juarez, you see what this habit now, whether you legalize it and therefore take the need for gangs and all, that's another discussion. I'm not a big legalize drugs. Marijuana, I don't care. If people can buy vodka legally, let them buy a reefer every once in a while, I don't care. But crack cocaine is not something that you want anybody to use because of what it does. And growing up, our neighborhood, where Tim and I grew up in Brooklyn, was wrecked by heroin. It was a good working class neighborhood, and then heroin came along and it changed everything. People began locking doors. Junkies steal from their mothers. It did not make society a better place. So I'm not a big legalize it all and let it rip person because of the collateral damage.
So I'm afraid the time has come to close the program. We want to invite you all for a reception that will be next door. And let's thank Pete for a very thank you.